Oh, I gotta mute it.
I think we're live. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
I don't think I... Oh, yeah, I have it up. Okay.
I have the chat up, but I gotta mute it.
Oh, yeah, I need to make sure I have that muted also, because I'm... Oh, yeah, okay, I did. Thank God. So... yeah, so we'll kind of give people a few minutes to kind of trickle in. It usually takes a few minutes because YouTube has been really bad about notifying.
No, really bad. Yeah.
So,
Though this week for your live stream, it notified me only 6 minutes late, which so sometimes it's 20, 25, 30 minutes late. So that
people get it like an hour and a half into it. They're like, oh, I just got the notification. I'm like, wow. Okay. So, but while we're waiting for people to sort of trickle in, I think ask Kevin, Alexa, were you able to actually finish the book? It's a thick one. It's a
Did
I didn't realize how dense it was until I started reading. I was like,
it's a lot. I see why this was a textbook for someone.
Yes, for sure. So I was like, I kind of underestimated until like this last week when I saw how much I had left, and I was like, oh my God, it's a lot. So I got done with it
the last 2 nights. I realized I had to read like 140 pages, and so I forced myself to split it 70 and 70. But I went later than I wanted, but I had to do it. I had a job.
I planned to read it earlier in the week, but then with everything that happened, I was very distracted by the news and everything, and so kind of last minute, I was like, oh my gosh, it's so dense to get through. So
we had to hear from Marcello.
Oh my God.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's definitely going to be
I won't jump ahead of our general opinions, but Marcello is like the one dim spot for me.
One degree. Yeah.
Poor Marcello.
It's like my number one, like under I have like notes, and I was like, Con, it's like Marcello.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to that.
I know you discussed it on your live, like if they have to pay to do excerpts, like I get it, but I'm like, why that one? Okay.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, we'll definitely talk more about that. Okay, so it looks like Marcel is definitely a dim spot. So hi Violet, hi Toby, Kelly, Miranda, Brianna. Yeah, well, definitely. I don't want to I want to kind of start really generally before we get into I definitely think I have more pros than cons for this one, which is nice. So sometimes it doesn't go that way. So
I mean, I was part of like the worst one ever.
I definitely think that was the worst one.
I think we read together the worst book of the books you read last year.
Yes.
And it was my fault. So
well, luckily we got this one. So in case you are aware of what we're discussing, we're talking about The Magic Words, Writing Great Books for Children and Young Adults by Cheryl B. Klein. This was recommended to me by several people, but I know someone who recommends it heavily is Michelle Schusterman. She actually recommended this to Lindsay Puckett, who unfortunately, if you guys have noticed, is not here. She has fallen ill. She's not feeling well and was unable to join us. But this did come heavily recommended by Michelle. So Michelle is another author tuber, if you're unaware of who she is. And she primarily writes middle grade, but she is traditionally published. So if you haven't already found her channel, I highly recommend Michelle. She is really great. She's a really great resource for middle grade and also kind of like being a writer as your profession, and sort of the ins and outs of that. So I think she's fantastic for that. So, and I could definitely see as I was reading this, I was thinking like, I could see why Michelle likes this book. I think a lot of her advice, I could see it being reflected in this. Like I can tell that she was influenced by this. And I also think one of the great things about Michelle's channel is that Michelle is like very like soft-spoken and very kind. And I feel like that was the tone of this book.
So is Cheryl. Yeah.
So, which is, sort of like what I really like, especially when we're comparing.
She's your mom editor. You can tell.
Yeah. 100%. Especially when we're considering it versus previous craft books like John Truby, or even like Lisa Cron, who I like her stuff, but they're very harsh and like this is what you should do, and they have a very like biting, I think, kind of personalities, but she was very soft, very like, look, if it works for you, cool. I'm just trying to tell you, this is a suggestion,
Which I appreciated. Like,
Yes.
it's a craft book that doesn't say if you don't outline, you're lost forever, you horrible pantser. She was like, if you do it this way. I even liked how she was like, if you want to do a book map, great. If you don't, that's okay too. I was like, thank you, Cheryl. I don't want to do a book map. That hurts my brain.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times when people read craft books, they get very put off when people are really pushing and like they feel like someone's pushing them. Like some people just immediately react to like, I don't want to listen to anything you say just because I don't like the way you're telling me to do it. And I think she really handles that well and doesn't really make you feel like you have to do any of these things.
Agreed.
And I also think, like, just sort of overall, one thing I really appreciated is her perspective is very different as an editor for traditional publishing of young adult and middle grade books, because we often get other writers or we get teachers, but she's kind of coming from a different point of view, which I found really, really helpful to kind of see like what are editors looking for? What do they expect when they're buying books? And then also what kinds of feedback are they providing when they're helping their authors get the book ready for publication? So
and as sweet as she was, I liked that because it is her job. She was very sharp in her way about like, if it's not commercial, if I don't think it can sell, I'm just not going to buy your book. I was like, yeah, thank you, Mom.
Yeah. I actually thought that was one of the most helpful sections when she's talking about like sellability and like what makes her like instantly. And she also says like, look, you will find books who don't follow these things. These books get published. People publish them. She's like, I'm just telling you what I do. And if I can't see it, then if it doesn't follow these things or have at least these things, I'm not going to buy it. And I also like that she said that these are the kinds of things that would make me not buy something. Yeah. Right. Not just like, what is she looking for, but also like things that would put her off. Yeah. Because in that section, I realized that I was kind of doing that. And I was like, oh, I got to fix that because I can see now what she's saying, because she talked a little bit like about nebulous like stakes or nebulous sort of premises. And I was like, now that I think about it, mine's a little nebulous. I need to like really like refine it. And that like helped me. And I actually did. And that was when I had like my big light bulb moment. So I feel like sometimes just hearing people say things helps trigger stuff for you. And it did. It helped me. So I thought that section was really honest, and she was like, look, this doesn't mean it can't be published. It doesn't mean quiet books don't get published. It doesn't mean that you have to have these things clearly defined, but it's going to be a harder sell. It's going to be harder for people to grab it. And you're going to have something else that's going to make people want it. So
as someone who's never sold anything, I thought it was interesting to see how she, which I can't find where it's at now, where she shows like how she would edit a chapter. I really like that part.
Yeah, the in revision where she annotated it and then Cass Morgan wrote her version.
Yeah.
I liked that a lot. I mean, the original writing sample was painful.
God, it was so painful.
But to that end, I think she did a phenomenal job. I don't know who wrote that. I'm guessing she purposefully wrote that sample poorly, is my guess.
I hope so, and she didn't just grab someone's actual.
She's too nice to have done that. But it was beautifully crafted in the sense of like, it was like a checklist of so many essentially amateur writing mistakes. I was like, this is very illustrative of like so many things you shouldn't do.
Yeah, I definitely think that was like something that we haven't really seen before in other craft books. And not only that, but we're really getting it from like an industry professional. And like, it's not just like speculative, like what maybe an editor would say. It's like, no, this is an actual editor publishing in the actual field, like from a top house, that she was, because she was for Scholastic for a while there. So
she definitely worked on the latter Harry Potter books. And like the very last ones, because I think she joined Scholastic in the mid 2000s or the early 2000s.
I was gonna say that that's probably why she brought up Harry Potter so much, but all these crafts bring up Harry Potter so much.
Yeah, I think that's why, but also there's a lot of Scholastic books they bring up, so my guess is it was easier to get the rights to excerpt them because she worked there at the time that this was written. So, but now she's at Lee and Low. So
yeah. So I definitely, and just kind of like overall, before we like keep going into specifics, I definitely want to say that I highly recommend this book overall to like anyone who is going into children and young adults. And I would consider this like a primer of like anyone who's just kind of going into it. Kevin had mentioned that his boyfriend, Damien, he has an MFA in writing for children and young adults. And this was a required text that they had to read.
Yeah, he went to Simmons. He went to Simmons, and it was the required. It was like the main textbook they used. And he also told me that the work pages. He told me this. I haven't told you yet, Laura, but the work pages in this, they were required to print out and use for every story they wrote in school. And he said he still to this day uses the worksheets from this book.
And I mean, I didn't use them because obviously not me. But I skimmed them and they looked lovely.
Yeah. That was actually one of the pros that I wrote down for this, is that I think a lot of the exercises are excellent. I didn't actually do any of them because I was trying to read through it, but I definitely marked ones that I want to come back and do. And there were a couple that I have done before that I know were really helpful. And I like that she has a couple of checklists, like your first page, first chapter checklist. She has like a plotting checklist. And I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to use these when I'm revising to make sure I'm like hitting all of these points. So I definitely like, a lot of times I look side eye at some of the exercises in some of these craft books, but I felt like these were really, really like super helpful. And I think it's a great part of this book for sure.
Well, and especially that there's something for everyone. Like, and because she's got that mom vibe, she's like, pick and choose what works for you. Some of these might work, some of them might. And she did a good job at throwing a variety of things. So you could cherry pick. You could be like, oh, this is like the one thing that's going to unlock everything about this for me. Yeah. I also highly recommend this. And I think even beyond, if you don't write YA or middle grade, but you are influenced by YA writing style, which is incredibly emotionally immediate, especially fast-paced work. So I think this would help thriller writers. I think it would help adult romance writers, like, because she's basically teaching you YA style writing very well, which is like, you know, fast-paced, plotty, character-driven, very insular. Some very good tips about emotional reading experiences that I totally agreed with. I used the Pride and Prejudice bookmarkers, Kevin, that you got me. And like, whenever it was one where like, I was like, snaps, yes, I knew that, I agree, I put a Lizzie sticker. Whenever I was like, good job, Cheryl, I put a Bingley, because he's a golden retriever. But there were several places where I was like, snaps, yes, this is what I'm always trying to say to people. Like, it's an emotional reading experience, and that's how you should approach your beats. Yeah. Like, there's one where she is like, it should be emotionally honest and true, not to your emotions, but to your characters. And I was like, yes. Yeah. Yes, Cheryl. Thank you. And that's what I think YA does so well. And I, of course, hate it when people look down on it. But I'm like, we'll have the last laugh because we are slowly creeping into all other adult genres, our writing style, because it is very much like an emotionally immediate reading experience, which a lot of readers like. So.
I liked, too, that because a lot of the previous craft books, as someone who writes, you know, young adult, like a lot of the advice in some of those maybe doesn't always work for young adults or isn't always reflective of what's happening. And so I like that this is very specific to writing for young adult and middle grade. And I do like that she distinguishes even the difference between those two. Like, what kinds of emotions are you thinking about? What kinds of things, like in middle grade, you're working towards this kind of understanding. And then when you're like an example kind of, it was where she's talking about like middle grade, like at the end, you still want a return to home of feeling safe and stable. Whereas young adults are looking more to break out, more freedom of being their own person. And so just distinguishing, because I think that that's really helpful for someone who maybe is considering doing both, what you should be thinking about in terms of the difference. Even though they are both doing something similarly, there are differences in what the expectations are and what kinds of stakes and motives and, you know, drive that you have in the characters.
I also really appreciated a lot of her middle grade examples. The favorite one that at least sparked for me was the one with her writer who wrote it in first person first. And then they were like, a 9-year-old doesn't sound like this. You can either rewrite it or write it in the third person. And I thought that was a really good demonstration of, don't forget that middle grade, you are writing from the perspective of children, and you have to really understand what age they are. But third versus first can give you different creative license as an author. And I loved that example.
The whole set is really, because I think people wonder, like, how do I decide if I want to write first versus third? And I think she really breaks down, like, well, these are the questions you should ask yourself. What are you trying to do? What are you capable of doing? And then she really emphasizes, like, what emotion do you want your readers to feel? How do you plan to convey that? And I think that helps. Like, she really breaks it down and has you really answer questions about your intentions to help guide you, rather than telling you, if you're writing like this, you should write it in this style. And if you're writing like this, instead, she's trying to get you to make the right decisions for yourself and go in the right direction based on, asking yourself the right questions.
But I mean, that whole chapter on voice, I thought was incredible. It's so hard to talk about voice, but she managed to break it down in a way that made sense to me. Just like her notes about understanding the natural diction of your world and your characters. I was like, duh, yeah. I mean, like, it's something that we do subconsciously. Yes. But if someone wants to learn, I thought that chapter was spectacular.
I think that's a great point, because that's something I kind of noticed, that I was like, okay, well, some of this may be stuff you already know, but it's some stuff that you may know or do intuitively, but then having someone actually explain it makes you more purposeful in the future. And that way, sometimes maybe, especially like, for example, her pacing. I thought her pacing chapter was really, really helpful. Really, I think that's also something people have a hard time explaining. It's like, what's wrong with pacing? And so I think some of the pacing stuff that she recommends is, again, something we do intuitively, but because we're doing it intuitively and not purposefully, there may be instances where we're not doing it right. So she does tell us, like, okay, well, look to make sure you're doing these things. And I feel like it's going to be really helpful for me when I read through, to when I do find a spot that feels like the pacing is off and I'm not sure why, I can go back to that section and then be like, okay, so this is probably why, this is what I'm doing. Because she explains, like, the different types of narration, if you're doing sort of narrative and descriptive. And I mean, all of that was extremely, like, detailed and specific, that I think is going to be really helpful, especially someone in revision, for sure.
Yeah. One thing that she talked about where I was like, I just love the way she said it, was personality postulates. Yeah. That was something that really clicked for me, because I was like, I do this. I mean, most writers do this, but it is such a good way to explain building character and how it works with your conflicts and your story and how to, like, create arcs. I was like, I just thought it was, I thought it was gorgeous. A great explanation of how to construct a character who isn't you, but who behaves consistently in your story. You decide on these, I mean, postulates is a way to say it, but it's like, these are these viewpoint rules for your character that may or may not be true. And I'm like, yeah, I love that.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there was a lot of instances where which this happens a lot with crap books, but it happened a lot with this one in particular, that it's just like the way she said things really stood out to me. I think it's because she specifically does work in young adult and middle grade. Like, she understands how to word them in a way that young adult and middle grade writers will understand. So there's a lot of stuff that she worded that I really liked, just the way she worded it. I highlighted a bunch of different ones, so I'm going to find a good one. So give me a second.
I like that Violet said in the chat, she said, when reading craft books, I both want to learn and be affirmed that some of the things I'm already doing is right, which is what I think you'll get from this book. Is you're like, yes, exactly. This is what I'm doing in my book. Exactly. And even thinking about the term, the postulates, she uses a lot of terms in here that I really like. And I like that she explains, and I like that it's very, like, academic, but not in an off-putting way, or not in a way that makes people, but it's just like, oh, so-and-so who wrote this book uses this word, and I really like it to explain this. And I found like that was really helpful. I liked the, she had one word I wrote down, elbow jogging or elbow.
I love that.
That was so helpful for me to, like, think about, like, oh yeah, okay.
I'm trying to find it. There was one of those where she basically was talking about filter words, but she didn't call them filter words. And I found it really interesting. Hold on. I'm going to see if I can find it. She called them internal something or other. Do you remember that?
I think I can search this. I have the Google version, so I can search internal.
Yeah, it was when she was saying how. In fact, I think it was in this section with the sample revision, which I know we're gonna get to talking about that, but I loved that chapter a lot. The editor annotations one. Here, you guys keep talking while I find it.
Right.
Because I just thought it was interesting.
I will say too, kind of like while they're looking for those, generally too, it felt more like a book of advice rather than craft, but like in a really good specific. It's so dense, but in a good way of like she covers everything, every aspect of writing that you can possibly think of is in here in very like nitty gritty like detail, which I really appreciated.
It wasn't internal. I was just thinking of it that way. She called them mental verb phrases.
Yes.
So I actually think filter words is a more elegant way to say that. But I do like that that does specifically categorize a type of filter word that is very she's not wrong. A mental verb phrase is definitely a description for it. Like I pictured, and those are definitely things to watch out for in writing. It definitely weakens writing a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I thought her basically calling out that family of filters was very sharp and apropos. I liked that a lot. So. Yeah,
definitely. Violet also mentioned another term she uses, lack plot, when she's talking about the different kinds of plot you have. I thought that was extremely helpful too.
Connection. That basically explains so many found family plots so aptly. Yeah.
So I feel like it's like I feel like there's so much that is really helpful in this. I mean, there were so many like actual chapters that I found so like particularly helpful. The promise, so like the promise and premise, the crafting a strong story concept, I think is exceptional. That was the one where he does ask the question like, what kind of person would suffer from this premise or situation? I think that's really helpful. I've heard other authors say this before, but sort of differently. Like ask yourself like, okay, here's the scenario or the premise, like who would do the worst?
Because I like that she gave like a couple different viewpoints. It's like, oh, there's this person that works in this part of the plot, or this person in this part of the plot, but like who is affected the most, that would be the most interesting person. I liked that section a lot.
Yeah, definitely. There were like, and she has the chapter 10 too, which is structure and sensibility, the power of plot. She explains plotting in a way that's like it's very different than Save the Cat, right? Where Save the Cat's like, this is how you like, this is the plot structure. She's not really talking about structure per se. I mean, she kind of is, but I feel like she does it very differently, but they can work in tandem. Like they're not opposed to each other, but she's just explaining it. I feel like she kind of fills in some of the things that people felt like were lacking in Save the Cat plot stuff.
It definitely fills in a lot of gaps. So I would say they're definitely complementary. Reads. I would recommend both of them.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. There were, though, I guess we can kind of maybe talk a little bit about
really quick. One of the things I highlighted that I like is she said you must complete a first draft of one of your first 4 novels you start. And I was like, I think that's a really good advice, because I feel like a lot of people like they give up and they feel bad that they give up, but she's like telling you like as long as you complete a first draft of one of your first 4 novels, you're good. Yes. So I really liked that, and I highlighted that.
Yes, as someone who's on my second novel, I'm like, okay, yes, I'm hearing you, and I'm gonna finish this one, I promise.
Although I think I'm at a completed number 5. It depends on what you count as a draft, though, because I never got further than 20,000 words in anything.
I think she means like
I think though that I think there's like a point there where she was like, look, she talks a lot about like not procrastinating things and really like getting things done, but she does it in such a nice mom way. She was like, look, you don't have to finish your first book or even your second, but like by the
I'm like, shit or get off the pot, man.
She says that too in the chapter where she gives you like 20 different ways that you can attack like revision. She specifically says in there, do not do all 20 of these. If you do all 20 of these, you are just procrastinating on revising. She was like, she's like, if you find yourself doing 1 or 2, great. 3 or 4, okay, cool. But like, if you find yourself doing all 20, no, you need to move on. Like you don't need to do all of these things. So I thought that was really good because a lot of out of the 20, there was like 3 or 4 that I typically do. And it would be nice, I think, to maybe do 1 or 2 things differently that I have not done before that she was recommending. And some of them, I felt like it didn't feel like it's not an old book. It's like from 2016. Okay, there's one thing that we'll talk about that I feel like is maybe a little outdated. But she's talking about
part of this comes from her previously self-published version of this, which was self-published in 2011. And once I got to that, I was like, that explains a few things that were dated.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I do like that, like, one of the things she explains for like revision is to create like a mood board, like to do like something with Pinterest. Because that's such a thing that people do now, you know, is to create. I'm not one of those people. I'm not really that creative, but I like that she included that as something to do to kind of understand the essence of your book. And it felt like it was like, okay, so she actually understands what people are doing. Although I would love to do the word thingy, to see which word you use the most.
I've done that before. There's a website where you can plug it in and it'll do it for you.
Yeah, I want to do that because I'm so curious. Like,
that's one of the like last steps I do in my revisions to see if there's any like words that I missed. Usually for me, it's like the love interest name is used a lot, so I can ignore that because like, but like it'll say like other words. I usually use that later on in revisions.
That actually reminds me of something, Alexa, we've talked about previously, is like how sometimes the editors will get mad if like the same word is used twice. And I think she actually gives a really good explanation that like it's not a rule of thumb of all words, but certain words, depending on what the words are, she says that if you repeat them too often, you become aware that you're reading a book rather than being immersed in the story. And that's why you don't want to do it. And I was like, okay, that at least makes more sense why some words would be triggered to like,
and phrases.
Phrases, exactly.
The same metaphor twice in the Ivies, phrased different ways, but the root was the same metaphor, and they made me change one.
Like, nah, girl, you need to change.
They're like, nah, girl, it's not original enough. You're going to the same well twice.
Yeah, but I like that explanation of like why it matters. It's not just because it's repetitive to hear, but it's more about the repetition can draw the reader out of the experience, and you don't want that. You want to keep them immersed, and you want to make them feel like they're in there, and you don't want them to become like cognizant that they're like, oh wait, I'm reading a book. There's an author who writes this kind of thing.
That's why I only get 1 bog standard per book, which is a phrase I love, but it's so weird to Americans that I only get to use it once.
I definitely think it would stand out to me because I've never heard that.
I love it.
Phrase before. I think if it was used a lot, I would be like, this is weird. Like it would stand out to me, you know. One time it didn't really stand out, but yeah, definitely multiple times. But I do want to talk about, because I do think she does a great job of talking about things that I think a lot of other books either don't do or don't do well. Like I think she did great on voice. I think she did great on pacing. And one thing she did tackle that I have mixed feelings on is her chapter on writing from somebody else's perspective.
She did the best that she could do as a white woman she probably wrote it in 2014 or 2015.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
That is where it has dated itself a little. And even in using Marcello as her dominant example as well, not to be overly pedantic, and I don't want to like be that picky person, but I was curious and I did look it up. The author is not autistic, which is fine, but it's interesting that her primary example reinforces to any regular person who picks this up, oh, I'm totally like green lit to write outside my experience. But that book was published in 2009, I believe, and definitely represents a different era of kid lit publishing.
Yes.
I feel
100%. Yeah.
I just felt like I didn't know it was published that long ago. It just feels like really old sample to use.
Yeah, and the sample that she included, I believe it was chapter 3, the conversation with the dad in the yard. Mm-hmm. I just had, like, reading it, I just had moments going, I mean, this is interesting, but I would really be curious to know what some of my friends who are autistic, how they feel about the thrust of this scene, some of the things the dad is saying, like, and especially because Cheryl tells us earlier that part of the arc of the book is that while he does it his own way, Marcelo, essentially his dad is proven correct, which is fine. But I'm like, that has implications given the way, like, just the consistent use of the word normal, real world. I thought it was interesting, and it just
the real world one really got me. I was like,
and so it just made me kind of think, like, how interesting. Not that there's anything wrong with the book, but like, how interesting would it be if a story like this was actually told from the perspective of someone who is actually autistic?
Yeah.
There was also the other one. There was another one where she wrote about a 13-year-old girl in Afghanistan. It was written by a white guy who's just in the National Guard. And she's like, but
also
the novel
very of its time.
She I highlighted it because she wrote, but the novel won me over completely and has since won praise from Afghan and Muslim readers as well. It's like, that aged so badly.
So here's what I'll say. Like, kudos to her. It's the first craft book I've ever come across that actually really tackles this in a very, like, complex way, because she does really give a lot of hesitance to doing it. She's like, look, if you're going to do it, like, recognize what your biases are, what the differences are. She gives really great examples of it. But I will say that it's just the truth of the matter is in young adult and middle grade publishing right now, you're not going to get away with writing from the perspective of some, like, a neurodivergent person. If you're not, they're just not going to publish them, or cultural, cross-cultural. Like, that's just
or they might publish them, but you might get pushback because you are legitimately very likely taking a spot from someone. Like, so because meaning we've still seen narratives where it's like the parent of an autistic child does get a book published, but there's always intra-community discussion about that. In the last couple of years,
I would say even in the last year after 2020, there's going to be even more hesitance, because there's just been so much more backlash and so much more call for diverse voices to tell their own stories. And so I just don't think this advice really holds true anymore and could get you into situations. What I will say, though, is that her advice is still helpful for if you write characters that are cross-cultural, just as long as you're not doing like first person. But like my book, I have characters that are a different race, and so it's still like something to think about and to consider. I think she gives really good tips on that, but I'm definitely not writing from a first person, like, POV of someone that's different from myself, just because. And she doesn't just, I think one excellent thing she does that I've never seen anyone else do in any of these books is she explains why it's also important to have not just diverse writers but diverse editors, because she really showed how her example was like the perfect example also for me, because it was an area that I studied in graduate school. But she used the example of the boarding school / residential school for Native American and Native.
That was a great example.
Where she said, like, her recommendation was like, wouldn't they be happy and excited about this? It's like, no, if you knew the history of what those schools were like for Native children, like, you would never say, like, you would never do that. And so I like that she used that example.
I like that she owned up to it.
Yeah, she was showing, like, look, I had no clue, and my advice as an editor was dead wrong. And so I think that shows how important it is.
I also gotta say kudos on that writer who stood up to her in maybe because she has Mad Mom energy, so he knew that she'd be chill. He pushed back in a time before he would have had or felt like he had significant supports in the writing community to stand up for what was right in that situation. Like, I imagine, I mean, we're barely at like 5% now, but I'm sure at that actually, I shouldn't rattle off percentages. I think 5% is just books written by Black authors right now. But I mean, the Native American percentage would have been probably 0.01 at the time that author was publishing, and he had to say to a major editor, no.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's so indicative of why it's important to have diverse editors, to have diverse publicists, diverse publishers. Like, we need them at every level and not just at the writing level. And I just think that that's something that she really, like, she said, like, even from her own position, like, look, I was wrong, and someone else would have maybe been better at that and would have been a better editor for that kind of stuff, you know? So I think that really, because a lot of people don't understand why that is important, you know, and I think that was a really good example to show, a prime example, because it would have been extremely hurtful to the Native communities to read that, because it is,
they would have been like, what?
It is. The boarding school and residential school traumas is one of the biggest things that has affected Native communities. Even now, you have generational trauma from that. It has affected Native families and on, like, you know, across the board. And so it's just, it would have been so hurtful to an entire community to write in that way. And so it just shows you what kind of stakes there actually are for people. And I think she really emphasizes that, like, think about the effect that this can have on a community. And I think it's really important to understand that, like, we want to think about that in terms of impact and not in a positive way. Like, I think sometimes when people, and I'm going to say this as a white person, I think sometimes when white people want to write these other culture, they think that they're doing a good thing by making people aware of these issues or whatever. And it's like, that's not the impact she's talking about. Like, it's not up to you to make that kind of impact for a community. Like, it's more like what kind of negative or what kind of things could come out of that, rather than the sort of white savior impact that you think you're going to have on the issue. So
I think it's because a lot of people feel like, oh, this story needs to be told, so I'm going to tell it. It's like, but is it your place to tell that story?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been there. Like, I definitely, in my youth and younger, like, I've always been someone who has been really into, like, social justice and understanding things and wanting other people to know. And it really took, like, maturity and understanding that, like, that's not the way I help. It's not, that's not the way I can help these communities, by speaking for them and putting these things out for them. And I think that's something that, I think that it's hard sometimes. People want to be helpful. They want to do things that they think are good, you know, or different. And it's like, I think she's really giving good examples of, like, why maybe. But I wish she would have just said, don't do it. But I know it was a different time. It was a different
time. Fairness, and to her credit, I would bet you money. So, like, this is probably this edition. It does say her new editor position, which means this was printed at least in the last 2 years, reprinted. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see them do another edition of this, a revised edition, because she's a really caring, thoughtful person. And, like, she 100%. Moved to Lee & Low, which is literally a diverse publisher. That's all they publish. And they've been very good about publishing niche. That sounds like a terrible word, but you know what I mean? From a publishing perspective, books that other publishers might say, not enough of an audience, too quiet. Lee & Low will take, you know, give those books opportunities. They've been good about that for years. And that's where she is now. I wouldn't be surprised if she herself is aware that this chapter is out of date. And I could see her taking the care to revise it for 2020, 2021. I mean, definitely. I guess we're in 2021 now. Because exactly, I do worry someone who reads it, while they get good information out of it, it's almost giving them permission. Which is just going to hurt them, because it's just so out of step with where we are now. And like, and she actually says it, and she says it, and it was great. She said exactly what we say. No one can tell you what to write or what not to write. No one is stopping you from writing anything, but it might not get published. And I'd say it's more like it will not get published in this climate.
100%.
99% of the time. And as I said, if you do, you then have to soul search, like, why me? Why did I get the shot? And what are the implications there?
Definitely. And I think she does kind of pose those questions too. Ask yourself, why do you feel like you need to write this? You know, and Lizelle even said that it wouldn't be surprised if a revision's not already in the works.
I bet.
For this. So because she's at Lee & Low now.
And with the events of 2020, like, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a revised edition published this year. That
also, and maybe a little bit in her defense, it's hard to actually come out and say that to people, to say, you shouldn't probably write this. People get very defensive about being told they can and can't write something, or they shouldn't write something. It's very debatable still. It's a very sensitive issue.
I mean, I agree with that, but also she is in a position of power. So
I agree.
For her to have said that would have been a big, like, good thing to have done.
Yeah, but in fairness, published 2016, so probably written 2015. we would have never said that in 2015 or 2016. The conversation, the goalposts have changed so much. I can actually tell you when the conversation shifted. It was early 2017. Because I remember the tweet thread. I remember every drama, every escalating Twitter discussion. So meaning in 2015, 2016, they were still buying books by white authors writing outside their lane, and the conversation didn't shift until 2017. So
yeah, and I still think every once in a while we've seen some of those ink through, and then they often get retracted. Or they get a lot of flack, and you really have to.
Or they just get, honestly, this isn't what anyone wants to hear. They just get ignored. Yeah. Because within the communities represented in those works, they will basically, I don't know if they have a literal discussion, but I've heard that sometimes it does happen where it just goes, we're just not going to boost that title.
Yeah.
We're going to boost Own Voices work over that. And books can be suffocated of oxygen, which is not nice, but it is true. So,
I mean, so piggybacking off of that, something I brought up to Laura the other day is that the discussion of needing more diverse editors and along the whole chain is something I noticed is that for the craft club, as far as we're aware, we've never read a book by a person of color or anyone that wasn't just a white cis person. And something we talked about is like, a lot of this, a lot of the advice seems like really repetitive, but it could just be that we're reading books that are by the same background. So if anybody has any ideas for any or knows of any, another issue is we don't know if there are any that are even published. Like,
because I'm not obviously I'm picking ones that are relevant to topics or things that people are recommending, and I'm realizing after Kevin brought that up, I was like, I don't know of any off the top of my head that I've seen that are writing craft are being by people of color or any sort of minority status. So I think maybe it would be nice to hear some voices from other people, but that could also go along the line that we don't have enough diverse published writers to begin with, or published editors to begin with, to even have people writing these books. So if anyone has any recommendations for writing craft books written by anyone that we should look, I'm definitely, because when Kevin said that, I was like, oh my God, you're right.
It's also the industry though, not just that side. I mean, the literal craft book side of the industry. They used to make more money than they do now. I mean, I'm sure they still make money, but it's a niche publishing arm. There aren't a lot of traditional publishers who publish craft books, first of all. But also because there are so many seminal texts that sell so well, they won't publish new ones. And so it's primarily white men of a certain age who have written them, and then some white women of a certain age. This is one of the few, and I think Lisa Cron's as well, that have actually been published in the last 5 years.
Yes.
There aren't a ton of and then Save the Cat writes a novel, but that was springboarded off of Save the Cat, which is a seminal text. There are just so few opportunities given. So there's a pipeline problem, a serious pipeline problem.
Yeah, for sure. I think that goes with a lot of just literary theory as well. I mean, even when I was in graduate school, it's you have bell hooks, and then that's about it. It's you don't really have a lot of diverse voices in a lot of these educational and academic spaces, period. I do think that's changing, but it also takes a level of authority and also experience before you feel comfortable writing these kinds of books. And we're only seeing this kind of diversity recently. So I'm hoping in the future we'll get more people who are writing these kinds of things, especially some of these really excellent writers. It'd be great to have something from them that are, kind of explaining their process or how they do things and how they sort of also deal with these craft books. And maybe these craft books are coming from, I mean, we know that even just men are much different in how they explain to do things than women are. So to be able to get something from someone from more diverse voices would be a really interesting way to look at writing and the craft of it.
Absolutely. We just did that in unison. I did have, just as we're talking about kind of limitations that kind of speaks to this, I will say one thing I did feel reading it. Again, it's not its fault, but a way in which it felt slightly dated to me that I don't think can be fixed. I would say this is most useful to pure children's literature to pure YA fiction, meaning that's actually written for kids, i.e. lower YA. Not, and that's partly because I guess we can talk about it now. I'm wondering if this is also what you pinged on. The examples are so old. The examples are ancient, and I'm wondering if they came from the first edition, the self-published edition, because there was not a single YA title other than a few that I could tell she threw in that were being published in like 2016. I'm glad she was able to put Shadow Shaper in there, and I'm glad that it did well enough that we know what it is. But some of the other I'm like, well, that didn't break out. I happen to know what that book is, but in the year 2020, no one's heard of it. Some of the older titles haven't stood the test of time. And examples are only useful if people have read them, but also it's the comp discussion. YA moves so fast and has evolved so much. I don't think you can comp a book from 2012 for a 2021 YA. I don't even know if you can comp a 2017 or 2018 YA in 2021. So meaning at a certain point you can't help it because this book is published when it's published. But I could see people who read this not unless they are well read in current YA, I could see them not actually grasping what YA is in 2021. Unless I hope you read, but I felt so much of what she said was super relevant to writing. Like if you're writing a 16-year-old protagonist who actually feels 16, but not if you're writing 17, 18-year-old protags, anything sitting in the crossover space. Basically why I read it to adults. It wasn't covered as well in this. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I do think I was looking for that too, like some of the more recent, like she does mention Shadow and Bone.
By a miracle, yes. And that's the thing. I'm like, like it stood the test of time. Yeah. It's still relevant. Enough people have read it. Though, of course, if you were doing it now, you might talk about Six of Crows, but then, of course, you'd actually have to have a conversation about how a bunch of 25-year-olds, if you tell me they're 17, apparently it's YA. But that's a whole other conversation. Yeah. I haven't read it, but I've heard from so many people, they basically are adults.
Yeah.
That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah,
we'll have a chapter about like what is YA even?
I think the issue with that also though is that in a fantasy world, a 17-year-old probably has to grow up quicker. So especially like depending on what kind of world it is.
But human brain chemistry doesn't change. Human brain development doesn't change even.
I agree with that. I just think that like the experience you go through may mature you different depending on where you like how you grow up. But I agree that to an extent there is enough that would read still like a 17.
I think maybe it's more along the lines of like the brain, because it's not done developing, like the ways in which they make decisions is still going to be the same.
It's emotional response. But what's hilarious is so often in reviews of YA, yes, this has happened to me, but that's okay. It's called juvenile if it's actually written like a actual teen and targeted to actual teen readers. It's like, well, what is YA even? And so meaning this is very well targeted to writing that kind of YA where it's like, this is for a 14-year-old to read.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's the same too for like middle grade, because I think about it in terms of like what, like I brought up earlier, Michelle Schusterman, the kind of middle grade she writes is for middle grade aged children, right? It's like, it's not middle grade that like a lot of adults are going to be looking for. Like it's meant for young people to read. And I do think that this advice in this book lends itself to those kinds of books where you're trying to, but I think you're right in that it's like, it's hard. Like what is, because I would say that like we're seeing less and less of those kinds of books in YA period, where they're like really geared toward 15 and 16-year-old kids. Even though they are reading them, I don't think they're being written geared toward them. I don't know.
It's fascinating, honestly. I mean, my answer is personally, I think we got to bring lower YA back. I think we got to write plenty of those narratives for actual teens, and then we can have all the other stuff too. I want it all.
Yeah.
Why not all?
I mean,
we've pushed actual teen readers out of the category, and it's like they're SOL if they don't happen to like the YA that's written for the adult consumer.
Yeah, and I think I think especially like now I read them when I was younger, but I'm thinking of like Babysitter Club, which the characters were like 13, they were 14. I mean, I was reading them much younger than that, but that age group is kind of gone out of books. That like 7th grade, 8th grade,
they're in middle grade. That's the thing.
Okay, I feel like they've been shoved into middle grade.
Yeah, but it's not the same as like, you know, a young. I feel like there's a huge difference between like a 10 and 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. Like 13 and 14, you're kind of young.
Out for middle grade with 13-year-olds.
Yeah, I'd say because 13-year-olds now are categorized.
And that's another thing where this hasn't accounted for those shifts. And it's just when it was written, Laura YA is gone. And it's been shoved into upper middle grade, but there are limitations to upper middle grade.
Yeah.
I want lower YA to come back. I don't know if it will, though. That could just be a dream.
That's actually kind of what I'm struggling with my new book idea, is that it technically would be lower YA if it was still a thing, but because it's not, it's being shoved into upper middle grade. But then it's like, there are certain situations that you can't do in middle grade that technically people at this age could be going through.
Yeah.
And
that's what I'm trying to say. Like you know, in the 7th grade, I was sitting next to a pregnant girl. Like, you know what I mean? And you're not really seeing those. Not that I'm just saying all of them are like that, but I mean, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids are not, I don't know. When you say middle grade, I think so young, and I just don't think we're getting a lot of.
Right. Well, I think that's because middle grade is also shifting, though. It's not just, it's not.
Middle grade is basically anything from age 6 or 7 to 14.
It's too. Honestly, it's too large of a spectrum.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Because middle grade now, I feel like you said, like a lot of people assume that it's young, but it's not necessarily. Like a lot of these.
There's a lot of good upper middle grade now.
I've been reading some of Damien's graphic novel middle grades because it's like something that's what I'm working on right now. And some of them, like, almost be YA. Like, they're up there to the point where, like, they're going through a lot of things that YA people, like, YA books go through without, like, the more explicit YA stuff.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, honestly, a lot of upper middle grade is just watered down YA.
Yeah, no, but honestly, because I've given advice to people, sometimes that's the only way to salvage a manuscript you love that YA just literally won't look at. They're just like, no. And sometimes the only way right now in this market is you have to make it upper middle grade. I have so many feelings.
I think too, it kind of follows even like television. Like when you watch a teen show, they're never younger than 16. Like they have to be old enough to drive. I feel like there's hardly any teen shows where they're freshmen in high school. You know, like that's one of the things I liked about Degrassi.
But they're targeted to tweens.
I think it's so interesting.
Also because the markets have changed. Like tweens didn't exist when we were tweens.
It's interesting because like Damien and I were just talking about this yesterday. It's like the people in Riverdale are the same age as the people in Hannah Montana. And they're very different shows for very different people.
Yes.
And I think that YA middle grade publishing is the same, where like it's basically the same thing, but very different. Like how they go about it. Like they're dealing with the same issues. But...
And there's a chasm between. And in that chasm, we're definitely missing something. But I understand the industry struggle because it's their marketing categories. That's what they are. It is a marketing question because essentially it's that middle ground of like, are they shopping for some 12-year-olds are old enough to shop for their own reading material and some are not. Their parents don't let them or they're not mature enough to do so. So how do you get books to that 12-year-old? That 12-year-old is either going to be emotionally a couple years behind and not ready. Behind, that's a horrible word. It's actually that they're not ahead. They don't want dark. They don't want edgy. So they need to read sweet, safe, upper middle grade.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But if they're not ready at 12 to leap to slightly gritty 16-year-old YA, there is nothing in between.
It's so interesting because like the legend books, they read like they're 17. But remember, me and Laura, we were shocked when we realized they're like 14, 15-year-olds. And it's like,
that, yeah. YA's
when
been...
when you read those books, you're like, they read like they're 16, 17, 18. And they're like 14 at the beginning of the first book.
Which books? I missed what you said.
Legend books.
Yes. That was, and again, those were published a long time ago too, in terms of like how things have shifted even in the last few years, because the legend books are They were like, what, 2013?
They were part of the dystopian wave.
Yeah.
So
I remember there being like a whole like scene that's kind of sexual, and I was like, this is weird because like they read like they're 18, but they're like 14 in the scene. It's very strange.
The numbers fell off to me on that one for sure. Even then it fell.
Adam Ryder did suggest a How Dare We Write a Multicultural Creative Writing Discourse by Sherry Kwan Lee. So that I'll definitely write that down. And I'll send it to you, Laura, so we can look at it afterwards.
Yeah, definitely something to look at. But yeah, I also just think that when we're talking about examples, I feel like examples in these craft books are always difficult. We always seem to complain, and rightfully so, but also I feel like they take so long to publish these books, and so few books have staying power that kind of stand the test of time. We don't have a lot of craft books even coming out in the last few years. And even then, like, I feel like they tend to fall on the default of like The Fault in Our Stars and like books like that we can all kind of understand. But I'm getting so sick of the Harry Potter, to be honest. I'm really sick of Harry Potter.
Like, it's why I use The Hunger Game, partly because I've just read The Hunger Games so many times that I don't have to reread them to rattle off examples, which really helps. But yeah, I thought that was great in here because when she referenced The Hunger Games, I actually knew exactly what she was talking about. So like picking massive universal books everyone has read. Same thing. She describes the first chapter of Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Most of us know what that is without her having to excerpt it. So
Harry Potter will never not be used because it is so widely known that it makes sense to use that.
Yeah, and that's why I feel out The Fault in Our Stars. That one's really helpful to me because I actually know that so well that I'm like, okay, I can see what they're talking about. And so I think it's hard to go between like wanting more like recent books. It's also really hard, I think, to pick recent books because back then when things were first sort of exploding, there wasn't as many books as there are now. And I think it's so much harder to pick a book, like let's say even in the last 2 years, that everyone has read, that everyone
has read, that's illustrating all these principles. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's really hard. So it's like I try to give some like leniency when they're choosing examples, but then I got really frustrated when like because I feel like sometimes they'll pick one that they do to death that's like a terrible example. Like I felt the Marcella one, terrible example. Why did she keep talking about that one?
Also because like we haven't read it and it's not widely known. She had to talk about it even more because she had to tell us so much about it. So we had the context. And in fairness, I fully grasped the context because she told me everything I needed to know. I just wasn't that excited about the book. I was like,
That's how in Story Genius too. Like I think it's really great that she used an example of someone in the process of developing their own books. We got to see it through the process, but the concept itself was so terrible. It was such a bad idea for a book. It was so hard to read that you're just like, oh my God, I don't want to sit through this. So
I actually would have read more of the Madison tripping that girl in the 400-yard dash book as written by Cass Morgan, not the bad example. But I was actually connected to the stakes. I was like, is this girl a sociopath or is something going on?
See, even that example, I was kind of like, ugh, I don't want to hear about, I don't know. That one was kind of boring.
I mean, it wasn't my favorite. Like, I don't think I'd actually read that book because it wasn't
a better example though.
So
definitely. But I definitely think that like because even in like writing deep scenes, which is another craft book I really like, they use so many examples and they spend so much time explaining the context of the scene to show you that it's just like, okay, well, I just read 4 pages of summary of this book so that you could give me a half a page explanation of a concept. It's like, why are you choosing these? But and when we read Ursula Le Guin's, she does talk about, she was terrible because she used all really old classics, like ones that are just not even relevant to even be able to talk about anymore. It's like, why are you using like, you know, Tom Sawyer or Huck, you know, like why are we using like those kind of classics? Because she said it was too expensive and hard to get, you know, to be able to use other people's text. I'm like, okay, it can't be that hard, Ursula Le Guin, for you to be able to use some people's books. So I don't know. Yeah, I think she picked a lot. I think Cheryl picked a lot because they books that like she had a hand in, or she was able to like get.
And we're at her publisher. So, but what makes that interesting, therefore, is Scholastic is a very specific brand, and thus and maybe that's what contributed to that. This felt very perfect and targeted to the sweet spot of actual children's literature.
Yeah.
Because Scholastic, knock on wood, but for the most part, they don't publish upper YA. So they do sometimes. It's actually really funny because I am aware of, like, I'm not going to spill tea, but when they do offer on upper YA, they tell you you're not going to be in the book club.
Yeah, because I've had friends be told that
if you don't meet the Scholastic brand, you don't get to do the book fairs.
Yeah, I've had friends tell the Classic that they say they do. Yeah, they let you know.
They tell you because honestly, that's one of the main advantages of publishing with Scholastic. So, but yeah, among many other things, it's a great publisher. But book fair sales are legit, man. Like you can make bank money off of selling well at Scholastic book fairs. Apparently, like you'll move volume of books. So
I don't think any of mine are ever going to be really.
Same.
I
think my first two, or at least my first one, could have, but I wasn't published by Scholastic, so I didn't get into that.
Yeah. And kind of to segue into like another thing that not that I think it's a con necessarily, but I will say that I wouldn't say that the whole book is like new information that you may not have heard before. So some of it is a little rudimentary. Some of it is stuff that you've probably heard in some of Alexa's advice videos. I
recognize so much of myself. I was like, oh, I'm so smart. I agree with this.
Yeah. So like a lot of this, I'm like, okay, this is advice that, I've heard, but I do think there's enough new stuff and enough like insight from the editor perspective that it makes the book still worth it. But I just wouldn't say that it like, I was just like blown away by so much new information that it totally changed the game for me. Instead, I just found it helpful, insightful, and I felt like it does address some things. It clarifies, refines ideas you already have, and I definitely think it's more helpful to people who are newer into the genre,
like
especially into writing and traditional publishing in particular.
Yeah, if you're liking AuthorTube and you're like trying to figure this out, and you like the audio visual that you get from us, but you're like, I just want to read one like good meaty craft book. Yeah. This would be the one I would recommend for someone writing Kidlit, because it was definitely nice getting it in written form.
Yes,
because you have to watch a lot of videos to cover the same material.
That's what I'm saying. It's like a good primer that you can go back to and reference. And like I said, when I'm in revision, if I'm stuck on a section, I can see myself going back to this book to look for advice on like why it's not working. Like if I'm noticing a pacing issue, or if people give me feedback that there's a pacing issue in a certain area or something, I feel like I could use this book as a reference guide to be like, okay, what is she saying often slows down the reading? Where can I find that in my own? And then she gives really great examples and exercises on how to fix it. So I definitely see myself using the book in the revision process for sure.
And much earlier in chat, someone asked what a book map was when I brought it up.
Yeah.
If it's an outline, it is essentially an outline, but what it really is, it's the scene card method is exactly what it is. It's you basically write down every single scene in your book, and God, let me find what she says about what maybe you have it handy.
I know it's in chapter 10, but I don't know the exact page number.
You're breaking down very specific things, and of course, I'm not going to make a book map, so.
So I'm doing the scene card method right now, based on the scene card here, page 157, I think, is where it says book map.
So. You do scene number, chapter number, starting page number. When and where does the action of this scene take place? What characters are major players here? What do they want at the beginning of the scene? What is the action of this scene? What new information do we learn in this scene? What is the change that takes place by the end of it? What is the point of this scene? What is it meant to do, show, or accomplish? And then you can note in your book map anything you would like to address in revision.
Yeah.
So
So
it's a little intense to do this for the whole book, but I could see where it would help.
I think she's recommending to do this in the revision process, right?
Yeah, I think it's mostly a revision tool.
Yeah.
But I could see a hardcore outliner liking the thoroughness of this.
Yeah, I'm actually doing similar for mine because I'm replotting it now that I've changed genres, and I'm actually doing these theme cards, which I will admit and it's basically these exact same questions. Like, you're basically giving yourself all the information of the scene, like who's in it, what's the point, what does it change, all that stuff. To me, it's almost
you have a problem.
Yeah, it has helped me a lot figure out stuff before I'm drafting so that I don't have to go and I'm only just fixing one page, and it's caught me a couple of times where I'm like, oh, this is an issue. And to me, it almost feels like a zero drafting because you're really telling yourself. It's more than an outline, I would think, because when I outline, it's really very general. It's like, oh, a scene at the park. Oh, a scene at the school where she talks about this. But this is really in-depth understanding the point of the scenes and the revelations that happen, how it touches on both the external and the internal and all that stuff. So to me, that's more of a zero draft when you think about what a zero draft is, telling yourself the story. That's essentially what you're doing in this sort of book mapping scene card stuff. It is arduous though. That's why I like to call it zero drafting. It feels better than outlining. It's a little bit more than outlining to me. But I have found it really, really helpful. And I think that because I get really, I have anxiety disorder. And so I get really anxious. Certain things trigger to me. And when I'm sitting staring at a screen and I can't think of something, that's very triggering to me to not be able to write. But if I'm laying in bed and I have because I'm doing it by hand, on a piece of paper, then I can just sit there for a while and then it occurs to me and I kind of write it down so that when I do go to the computer, I have a whole understanding of what's going to happen. Now, it's not every single piece of dialogue, so I can still have some discovery aspects of it, of how these things are going to go down, but it makes me feel less anxious about sitting in front of the screen and having to write something because I have something to I have something that's going to get me in the right direction. So I think it depends on what kind of writer you are too, and what works for you. And I've learned I need more direction before I get to the drafting. I think my drafting will go by quicker because of it.
So different.
Yeah. My brain works very differently though. So I think that's part of the learning or the writing process is learning about yourself and what works for you and what doesn't. And that's why I like reading craft books because I feel like I get something out of all of them, most of them, and they also kind of help me refine and understand things. And sometimes it's just about them saying the same thing I've heard before, but they're saying it in a different way that clicks for my brain, in a way that it didn't in a different book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think if there was other things. Oh, I remember something I wanted to bring up. So this came up before, I don't think in a craft discussion. I think it was just in a discussion we had where we talked about the inciting incident, when it should happen.
Oh, yeah, her little.
Because I read Hooked. I forget who wrote it now, but I read Hooked, where it's all about the beginning of your novels, right? And he says he recommends that you put the inciting incident in the first scene of the book. And I remember I brought this up to you guys, and you guys were like, no, that's horrible. Well, she's saying it should happen preferably in the first chapter, and she's saying at the latest, the second chapter. So I'm
setting it up to take place in the beginning of chapter 3. I think it depends entirely upon what you mean by inciting incident.
Yeah,
basically.
And she defines it. She explains what she said. And I'm just thinking it's interesting because when we're thinking about that in terms of I also think it depends on how long are your chapters, what's in your chapter. Saying chapter is very.
Yeah. I think that advice might be helpful to some writers, but not to others. Because exactly, it's going to vary. And I did try to think about it for the Ivies, because this is what I also is nice about reading craft books. Even I didn't learn anything mind shattering from this, but I like how it forces me to think about my own choices.
Yes.
And think how does this rule slot into what I do? So my murder happens.
There's murder in the Ivies? I'm kidding.
I'm so shocked. Around page 50. But So it depends. I think the problem is how we think about the inciting incident. Because in some books it is the big thing. In the Hunger Games, it is the big thing. She volunteers as tribute.
Yeah.
That is the inciting incident. But I think in some books it's smaller than that, and it's and that's why I don't like the rigidity of rules, because it freaks writers out, because they're like, oh, it's not in the right place, but maybe they're just framing it wrong. So my murder definitely doesn't happen as soon as Hooked says it should, and it definitely doesn't happen as soon as Cheryl says it should. But at the end of, I think it's chapter 2, is the thing that technically sets everything into motion. It's not a murder, but it's a first shift in the story that raises the stakes. So like, it's technically there. It's just not what you might traditionally call an inciting incident. And I can't say what it is without spoilers. So
I know that someone, because I had mentioned this in a vlog, and someone had commented in my vlog that in Save the Cat Writes a Novel, in her section, I think the Whodunit section, she talks about how you can have multiple catalysts, and catalyst being, and I looked these up and I talked about it in my vlog, like, is there a difference between inciting incident and catalyst? And like, not really. They're basically the same thing, but some people interpret them different. And then there's also like the difference between inciting incident, catalyst, and then your first plot point, which is something different also. So
I think of inciting incident in terms of like the one that like I pre-plan for like discovery writing as the thing that propels my character toward the break into 2, which is the choice they have to make.
Yeah.
So in a thriller, that's a murder.
Yeah.
But yeah. And so for me, that does not rigidly come early in the book. But if you're more fluid with what it means, yes, technically you have different ones earlier. And I've been trying to think about it in terms of my new one, because as you know, the murder hasn't happened yet. It's a long story. I'm in the middle of writing it. And I will make pacing edits to it, but not just like it's not going to be in chapter 3. I'll tell you that right now. That's just never going to freaking happen. And I am trying to like noodle. I'm like, well, technically the thing that's probably an inciting incident, I plan on changing. So that's going to be super fun. We're going to have to figure out what I'm going to replace it with. That's a me problem though. So.
I just thought that was like so interesting because I would say, again, like I feel like it depends on like how your chapters go too. Like for some people, they have really long chapters. Some people have shorter chapters. And she just had said it like a couple of times. I
think it's a good guideline, especially for like just the average writer, the average book.
Yeah. And she does, of course, all of these have, exceptions to them. She does say, if your first chapter doesn't include the inciting incident, there should be plenty of clues laid towards it by the chapter's end so it can follow fairly quickly in chapter 2. So I think even if like it comes a little later in chapter 3, the idea is that there should already be an indication of these things, little pieces leading up that there is going to be an inciting incident. So at least you're moving in that direction. I think that's what Lizelle said too. She says she almost always does her inciting incident in chapter 3 or 4, but in all the chapters before, she's hinting and building the tension leading up to it so that people are anticipating something.
I would actually say that's how I wrote The Witches, where it's like it's leading. It's not in the first few chapters, but everything's hinting towards it happening. And I think it's the 4th chapter that it happens.
Yeah.
I think for me, kind of along with what you were saying, Alexa, is that when I read craft books sometimes, if they're suggesting something different, it does make me think about what I'm doing and asking myself, okay, well, why am I doing it differently than what she's saying? And if it makes sense to me and I understand it, then that's fine. But sometimes reading that makes me question, okay, well, why am I doing it? And then maybe I do change it based on that because of that. So I think it's about more of like knowing, like having purposeful decisions rather than like, this is just where it ended up being type of thing.
Yeah. And she does mention another cheat that thrillers do use, and I might end up using, we'll see, which is the prologue cheat.
I did want to talk about prologues as well, because I think because she talks about how technically, like for the majority, like in YA middle grade, people don't like prologues. But I think there are certain genres that lend themselves better to prologues and that I've seen them working and that actually can help. And one of those has been recently, I've been reading a lot of horror, and a lot of horror uses prologues to kind of set the tone really early on for something that's going to come back up later. Because I have
thriller trope as well.
Yeah, because I have played around with doing a prologue for mine, because I do think it lends itself well to a prologue to show something that happened previously and then later. But I'm also like nervous because I'm trying to get an agent, and I don't know how long that, you don't want the prologue to be too long, so you want them to see where the episode is going to be. So
you can also always do it later. So the Ivy's has a prologue because my editor wanted it. Actually, it was her suggestion, not mine. So I was shocked. I was like, "Excuse me, you want me to have a prologue?" I mean, I'm fine. I'm not mad about it, but okay.
Yeah, but I have noticed that horror use that. And in fact, Clowns in a Cornfield had a prologue that I know Lizelle agrees, like, we thought was really, really helpful to understanding things later. And that book did really well. So a lot of people loved it. So
I love it, especially when it's like third person. That's you realize is probably the point of view of the person who dies, who otherwise is not the point of view person. But I especially like it when it's not clear who it is, and it's like she stands on the edge of the cliff. Actually, it's always my husband did that, and I really liked it because I was like, all right, I know from the prologue that one of these people ends up on the edge of a bridge, and I liked carrying that with me into the book. It just depends on the reader.
Yeah, a lot of TV shows do that as well, where like at the beginning of a new season, they'll show something that happens at like mid-season, and then they back up, and it helps with pacing, I feel like, because then they recommend, like, especially if some of it's going to be a little slow, that at least gets people to know, like, exciting stuff is going to happen. You just got to kind of get there first.
For this book, because it, not to justify myself, structurally it requires more character and world building than my previous thriller, and so I'm just having to navigate a different pacing structure. So I might end up doing a prologue. Because I'm like, a bitch is gonna die. Don't worry, a bitch is gonna die. Like,
I think an example of like prologues that people don't like is when they use it to like info dump and set things up, when that stuff should be peppered into the narrative and told, over time. Like, for example, like my husband is currently listening to Wheel of Time, and he hates when the books open up with like 100-page prologues that are not even like to the story. He's like, oh my God, the last book ended on a cliffhanger, and now I have 100-page prologue before we get into what's happening. And it's like, I think those are the kinds of ones that people are kind of stuck in fantasy, to be honest.
Yeah. But she mentioned Leigh Bardugo, Shadow and Bone, which is what
I don't remember the prologue in that one.
I don't remember the prologue either.
Very short. That's why. But they're very. I often will give, and I need to make a video on prologues actually, because I've given that example because I would agree it's effective. It's like only a page and a half, Kevin. Each one has it, but it's basically like a fairy tale. And so it's like not literally once upon a time, but it's in third person, and you realize as you're reading, it's Alina's childhood. But it's like, it gave you that, like, at least from the first one, if I'm recalling correctly, but it was told more like a once upon a time, there was a girl and she had a friend, and it was short and sweet, and it kind of slid you into the tone of the book. I thought it was very good.
I own those. It's just been so long, so I should go back and look at
I'm pretty sure I'm remembering it correctly. Trying to think of other ones. One that I thought was really good, The Bone Houses, which is by a friend of mine, full disclosure, but I think it had a very effective prologue, because it basically gave you a sense of the world and the village and the girl's childhood before jumping right into the action. And it gave it that book happens to have a whimsical fantasy tone, and the prologue set the tone. So then that's what a good prologue should do. It should set the tone. It should help with suspense as well. It's like tone, suspense, world, character. So
What I thought was interesting is every Game of Thrones book opens with a prologue and ends with an epilogue, and those are done well because going in that it sets up a lot of stuff for the book or the next book, and you always know that whoever the point of view person is going to die at the end of their prologue or epilogue. So I always really like those in those books.
It's also it's a fantasy convention. You can definitely get away with it more in fantasy generally, but less so in YA fantasy. I think the main thing is that prologues are either lazy crutches in a bad way, or they're brilliant, beautiful crutches in a good way, and it's really hard to use it as a good crutch. Like you have to have a lot of talent to pull it off.
The Witches has a prologue, but it's not really a prologue. It's more like a chapter 1, but it's like a page and a half, 2 pages. And it originally didn't have it. Like, I didn't think it was necessary, but my agent wanted it in there. So I'm okay with cutting it out if it comes down to it.
I'll say if a professional tells you to add it, you just smile, nod, and go, sure.
Oh, like, sure, I'll do what you want.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah,
honestly, that's something
Sure.
Yeah, that's something I've considered. Like, I'm gonna wait until I'm like really actually ready to query, but it's something I've considered of having the prologue, but then possibly not querying with it. And then if I actually get to talk to an agent, actually they're into like, look, I have this idea for a prologue. Here's what I have. What do you think? And kind of getting professional advice.
I like that idea. Like if I were querying the Ivies, I designed my first page to be really strong, and I would want my prologue to come first for. Like when you just don't have much opportunity with the reader, that's what I would do personally.
Yeah. Well, when Rena was like, "Why don't you try writing a prologue to this?" I was like, "Okay." I mean, I don't know if people like that, and I figured if an editor likes the rest of the book, they're not going to not buy it just because of the prologue. So I was like, if the editor hates it and they want to cut it, that's fine. I'll write it.
Yeah, I think a video on that would be really helpful. You're right that a lot of people use prologues as like a way to like, especially in fantasy, to spend way too much time building the world when that can be done in the actual narrative. And it's really just
character, and it's in a totally different voice, and it's too. I think length is a huge thing. A page and a half is perfect. Like,
yeah, that's what I think she says too. They should be short. They should be just a glimpse of something that's going to help get you, like you said, into the tone or the mood or the vibe of like what's going to happen, or something that's going to come up later. So especially if it's going to be slow, like if it's going to be like in a world where blah blah blah, it's like, okay, no one wants to start like that. Like we want something exciting from the beginning. So One other thing that I found that was really kind of helpful, it was more helpful that like I needed someone to like give me permission or to like actually co-sign with what I was already thinking, is she kind of talks about how important it is to understand what the overall point and feel of your book is. And then anything that is deterring from that, get rid of it. Even if it's like your first imagination. And that was what has been really holding me back with my own, is that when I first conceptualized my book, I conceptualized it as a contemporary. And so there was just, for so long, I was trying to make certain elements of contemporaries work for the story, instead of being like, okay, what am I actually trying to achieve? What is the actual story? And being willing, because there's just some scenes that I've had from the very beginning, from when I first conceptualized this book, 5 years ago, that I was so hesitant to let go of, but they just didn't work for the way what I really wanted. And so when you hear that sort of like advice to kill your darlings, it doesn't mean like actual literal characters sometimes it's your darling ideas, a scene you really like, or a description. Like there's one description in my book that I love so much that I really want to keep in there, but I don't think it's gonna work anymore. And so you have to be willing to just be brutal and be like, this isn't serving the book anymore, and really cutting things out for the better of the book.
Yeah, I've had to do that. It hurts. Like in the Ivies, I had to completely reconceptualize the mom character, which hurt because the original version was based on my mom, which personal. Well, although the irony is, like, it was a slightly sharp portrayal, and I was like, oh, if she ever reads this, she'll be mad. Whoops, I jinxed it. But I rewrote the whole thing because the characterization wasn't supporting my main character's arc the way she actually needed to arc. I'm like, the mom can't be like this because it doesn't serve the story. So I just rewrote it, even though I liked her the way she was. And someday I will write a mom like my mom, who was great, but it was complicated because those are interesting characters. But I realized I don't need the mom to be interesting in this book. She's just not in it. She's not involved enough for that to be worth the character development and screen time that would require.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something she gives. She gives a kind of advice that's somewhere in there where she says, like, it's not about what kinds of characters you want to have in the book. It's like, what kinds of characters does this book need? Yes. Right? It needs a parent like this for this to work.
And yeah, that sucked. I was like, aw, I like it.
Yeah, because like I in my current book, like my main character's parents are kind of like the kind of parents that I think my husband and I would be. Well, at least that was my initial like conception of it. But I've had to make some changes that I'm like, I would never say that. I would never do that. I'm like, okay, Laura, this is not you though. Let's let that go.
To facilitate your plot, sometimes they either have to be bad parents, like they have to be neglectful in a way that you probably wouldn't hopefully be, or they have to be like in this case, I needed the mom to be like annoyingly supportive. How dare she?
But yeah, I think that's like a really helpful thing to think about with your book is like not what you want or how you originally conceptualized characters, but like what do you need them to be like? What is going to make the most sense? Because you are making this stuff up. It's not like you're having to mirror any real life things to do it. So you need to make the best decisions of figure out exactly what it is you're trying to do, what tone you're trying to have, what point you're trying to make, what your theme is, and then you have to pick the right things that will serve that and make sense for it and what the book actually needs. Yeah.
I know this doesn't matter, but I just want to correct myself. I realized I had to make it not supportive. I'm right. No. My mom's actually annoyingly supportive. I was like, wait.
And I was like, oh.
I needed the mom to be the force in the story saying, you know, it's okay not to strive for the Ivy League, right? I needed someone to be like, you know, you could go to a state school and be happy. I needed that character.
Yeah. See, in mine, I need the mom to like not understand the daughter's issues, and I would understand those if it was me as the mom. Like I would be, but I just need her to be like not in a negative way, but just doesn't quite get it. And I'm just like, but I would get it. I'm like, it's you, Laura, even though she's lightly modeled after you, it's not you. So let's just do what's right.
Again, I love her acknowledgement that it's not about writing your authentic emotions.
Yes.
But the authentic emotions that make sense to the characters in the story, I'm like, snaps. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I definitely like needed to be reminded that like we all have to sometimes just get rid of things that we think are excellent. And that was like really, especially if you're spending a long time on a project, sometimes it's really hard to let things go. And especially for myself, I was like, what am I doing?
And if you change things drastically, like you did, where it changes genres, like that is, you have to be okay with getting rid of things.
And I think that's why I was like so hesitant for a long time. I mean, Aaron has been literally telling me for like almost a year. He's like, dude, I think this is a horror book. Like, I think this is a horror. I'm like, no, it's not. Because I was also like really scared of that, to write that. It just seems so much, apropos.
It's harder. Yeah. But also there's less in the market. So I think it's also, it was probably harder to arrive at because like there's way more YA contemporary in our face.
Exactly. Especially when I conceptualized the idea, I was just reading a lot of contemporary, and that's really kind of was there. And that's what I was telling Lizelle. It's like, it didn't occur to me to be a horror because I just wasn't seeing or experiencing that much YA horror at the time. And then, so and I do think we're seeing an uptick of it, though. I've seen a lot that have been bought lately and that are coming out. So
it's an offshoot of the mini thriller boom. So I think we're going to see more suspense, more thrillers, more horror, and I'm here for it. So,
yeah, me too. So, but yeah, there has to be a time where you put the book before yourself and
make
the hard decisions. Yeah, definitely.
There was my first book that went on sub. There was like a chapter that I really loved. That was like, it's like a kind of rom-com-y book. I don't know, but anyway, it's like a chapter I really, really loved. Then I realized it just adds nothing to the plot, so I cut out an entire chapter. It was like 12 pages that I loved, and just it's like one of those bonus chapters where like, oh, you'll get this bonus chapter if you if you pre-order, like that's how I think about it. So I knew it wasn't dead. I was like, maybe you'll get this extra chapter because it was so cute. I loved it, but it just did not serve the story at all.
And maybe if you hang on to those, you may find a way to work them into other books or other ways of using that kind of scene or character, So nothing's really dead.
I saw a bit more like, if you pre-order my book, you'll get this bonus chapter that no one else gets, and then I can still use it for something.
It's a good idea. My editor suggested, because we had to change my ending, she was like, you could offer this as like a digital bonus. And I'm like,
an alternate ending. I love those.
My friend Adam Sass, it was either a pre-order or something. You got like the alternate first chapter because it was originally going to be like a paranormal book, and so like you got the original first chapter of like how different it had changed, and he sent it out as like a bonus for people.
I live for alternate endings of like shows or movies and stuff when they have like the director's cut, like, oh, this is how we were originally going to end it. I love that stuff. So like I definitely would find that incentive to like.
Actually, yeah, I mean, I could offer the happy ending, which is very different from the book now.
It's just interesting to me to see the different endings and how things can go. Because I mean, people like those kinds of books too. Like, oh, it could go this way or this way. Yeah. And I like to see like what the writer was thinking, what they ultimately chose, and seeing the characters in a different way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're just giving me ideas. That could be really interesting. Because I know this is off topic-ish, but like I've been thinking, I'm like, I don't think I can handle doing a proper pre-order campaign. Like I think what that would require, it would make me cry. But like digital, I'm like, okay, sorry, I'm just thinking out loud. I'm like, I can handle digital fulfillment, but I don't think I can mail stuff, especially because quarantine is probably not going to be over, and I don't want to go to the post office.
I know.
You could do a pickup though if you really needed to.
Oh God, don't. Kevin, you of all people, I'm a terrible adult. Mailing stuff is difficult for me when we're not in a pandemic. And the one time I got sick last year was when I went to a post office to mail an ARC. This is before COVID, so I don't trust the post office. It gives me sick. So, yeah, I think it was the flu last year. So,
well, that's giving me anxiety because we got for whatever reason, the IRS is off topic, but they decided to mail our second stimulus check instead of direct deposit like the first. No idea why. Yeah. And then we got a thing from our postal worker because our mailboxes, I live out in the country, are not in front of our house. They're down the road. So they won't put them in the mailbox. So she put a thing in there and said, you have stuff from the IRS. You have to come to the post office to get it. We have been purposefully avoiding the post office because of COVID. I was like, oh my God, the government is trying to give it to me by requiring me to go in there to get that stupid check. Why
I haven't had a tax return in years, so they have to mail me.
The thing is like they direct deposited our first one, so I have no idea. Nothing has changed. So I have no clue why they're mailing the second one. They just decided that's what they were going to do.
Mine is just because I'm an author, so I no longer qualify for tax returns, so they don't have my banking information.
Oh.
Yeah, ever since I started selling books, I owe the government every year.
Damien had to pay in too because Damien got his second half this year, so he's gonna have to pay in. I mean, last year. I got to do my quarterly taxes.
Yeah. Oh God, I remember when I used to be like, I'm gonna get a tax refund. Yeah, no, that's how they.
There were many years that we've owed in the past because we do like freelance and like side business stuff. So
the freelance, that's what gets you. It's all the contractor stuff, and because booking is the same kind of income. So
we're trying to start this year better with that. Like keep better track and pay in ahead of time.
Yeah. Well, like now that I haven't, like the accountant literally tells me what to pay the government for quarterly taxes. I'm like, thank you, because I can't figure any of this out. So.
Yeah.
Don't ask me to do money, okay? Just tell me who to pay and when, and I will do it.
You know, though, Alexa, that's when a lot of these celebrities and stuff end up going to jail because they trusted somebody else to tell them what to pay the government.
Hey, I have the same tax accountant as a New York Times bestseller, so
they're
going
to jail and you're going to jail, so they'll be in good company.
You guys can room together.
Enough. God, they better steer me right. Seriously, if anyone is a resident of California and requires an accountant for book taxes, I do have one.
Well, someday I plan to be back living in California and selling books, so I'll definitely want that recommendation.
You can write off on your taxes for books. It's the best part every year when I get to tally up all my Sephora purchases. No, that's good to YouTube though. But you can do that. You could do that because you're YouTube.
Yeah.
Regular authors can't do that.
I need to remember that. Yeah.
You can write off makeup. You cannot write off your clothes. So
That's so weird.
Interesting.
It's because clothing is considered a uniform, and you uniform on your taxes apparently. So, or it gets into like this. You're more likely to be audited. It's something like that.
I'm gonna start using makeup just so I can write it off.
I'm gonna pay for the makeup. It's not like you get it for free. And Lizelle, would you please stop bragging about living in Canada? None of us want to hear it.
I know. I'm so sad. We're stuck here, okay? The accident of birth.
I think one last thing, we already kind of touched on it, but one I just wanted to kind of give about a recommendation about this that I think was really helpful. Is we talked about how she does have like a lot of checklists and like exercise and stuff. I made in chapter 10. She does 8 principles of setting, book map. She does a list of plot types, plot structure types, an inciting incident checklist. So I feel like all of these things are such good references that I really think that's another reason why I would recommend it. What I found really helpful. She also explains how half of the scenes, she says that roughly half of your scenes, so all of your scenes should either, the next scene should be a but, a therefore, or a and then. Yeah, and she said about half of them should be a but or therefore, and then the other half can be and then. So I thought that was like kind of a good, like just kind of rule of thumb to kind of make sure that a lot of your book, like, because you want your scenes to be interconnected. And so if you're doing too many and then this happened and then this happened, which is what one of my earlier drafts of my book was. It was a lot of just, and then this happens, and then this happens. And it was like, okay, if you can move around all your scenes and they can happen out of sequence, then they're not really connected or building off of each other. So I found like that she gives you 3 different types of resolution, like things that should happen in your resolutions, the plot checklist. So I just found like all of that stuff super helpful. Definitely plan to use it in my revision process. And so definitely like that. Yeah. Devasia, did we talk about cons? We did, but there wasn't that many, to be honest. Some information's a little outdated, even for a book that came out in 2016, just because the climate has changed. And also, just to kind of summarize that, some of this leans a little bit more towards actual books that are for children type of vibe.
Another actually that I thought of, kind of a con-ish. It's just with the like changing. I liked her publishing chapters. I thought they were good. However, I think it continues to really mislead the average newer writer that you can directly submit your work to decent publishers. It's just so rare. And I think at the time of her writing this, it made me wonder if she had retained some of the stuff from 2011. Yeah. Because I'm like, I can't think of that many publishers in 2016.
I can't about any of them still.
And a lot of them no longer do that maybe would have when it was published. Lee and Low, I believe, does. I think Tor still does, but they close it most of the year. It's not always. I don't think Scholastic does. Some smaller publishers do, but any of the publishers of note.
Yeah.
You will not be direct submitting to them. And conference culture has massively declined since this was published, even pre-COVID. Most editors that you would think of were not attending conferences and meeting writers and requesting slush. So that's just not relevant most of the time.
Yeah, I did mark that I found the last 2 chapters in particular. One was on publishing and the other one I think was on genre. Was it the one on genre?
Yeah, the speculative fiction chapter, which made me go, well, interesting. Why not have an overview of non-speculative fiction? It's skipped a lot.
Some of the terms were like a little strange. Some of those have changed a little bit too.
And I think defining horror but then not going over thriller and suspense is interesting.
Yeah.
does not always have a supernatural element. She didn't say always, but she said often, and I'm like, not always.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's gothic, so basically it's not actually supernatural.
Yeah. I just found those a little less helpful or less like direct to like what's happening right now. And I wouldn't, but I definitely thought the publishing one, especially saying like the slush pile, like that's such a long shot.
Publishers, yeah,
because I was like, even like a week ago or whatever, I noticed that some people in the new year on Twitter are putting their manuscript wish list, and there's a lot of editors that are actually saying what they're looking for, but they all say like not accepting things from unagented people. Like this is for you to tell your agent that I'm looking for this stuff.
It's just, and she does say it, but it's still like just emphasize it because it's true. Even if you get a publishing offer, you should really get an agent.
Yeah, I feel like it was part of it maybe is again to her softness that she didn't want to be 100% truthful, but I think Kevin is right that when she's in this position of authority and power that we could use that honest voice. That's like,
come on, Cheryl, tell me honestly the last time you picked a book out of slush.
I mean, that's my issue.
Not for a conference.
That's my issue is that she is in position power, so it's like I get that you're trying to be nice, but at the same time you need to be honest because you're doing a disservice.
And I'll say at Scholastic, at Lee and Low, they do slush. So, but like at Scholastic, I'm like, come on, how much slush were you reading?
Yeah. But yeah, I think overall there wasn't that. I mean, I don't think any of the cons are enough to make it not worth reading. Like it's 100% worth reading, and I think it's probably the best primer of like writing for young adult in terms that I am aware of that's out there that is the most comprehensive as well. And like I said, a very unique point of view coming from an industry professional. So speaking of that though, if we want to go off topic just a little bit, did you guys see that like because I know they got rid of like BookCon, but now Publishers Weekly is going to start doing a yearly thing. Did you guys see this? I saw it on Twitter that they're like that they were wanting to pick up like the BookCon, like since that's leaving like a hole, that they're going to try to do a new thing now with Publishers Weekly. I was just thinking about that in terms of like conferences, because I'm wondering like how often do people, I know this was popular like 5 years ago to like, I know that those are kind of not really used for pitching anymore, but it just made me think of it. Like people don't really get agents and pitch stuff as much, I think, at conferences anymore.
It's just not a major pipeline anymore. And in fact, not always. Sometimes good agents do them, but a lot of the time, the ones that I see on rosters are not necessarily agents I would recommend to people.
Yeah. Although I will say, again, this was a long time ago, but that's how Becky Albertalli got hers, what she pitched at a conference.
I mean, that is how Veronica Roth ended up with Joe Volpe. But like that caliber of agent, I just feel like they don't do those.
They don't do it anymore. Yeah.
I think part of the issue is that there is a certain amount of like privilege to be able to afford to go to the conferences. So a lot of these agents have moved to doing like Twitter pitches because anyone can do those.
They don't cost money or travel or time.
And a lot of agents, even bigger agents, use Twitter pitches. So like
that's why I'm just never going to be the person to recommend that you join a professional organization or attend conferences because I could not afford those. Yeah. I never did them because I could not afford them at the time. And I think anything that introduces a barrier to entry money-wise is not something that I advocate or recommend. Mm-hmm. So, and agents will tell you too, the quality is usually not great.
I couldn't imagine trying to pitch when I try to just explain it to people, like I get so like uncomfortable. I feel like I'm not saying it well enough. Like I think writing your pitch is so much better than trying to say it to someone face to face, have them like see their face drop or I don't know. It just sounds so horrible. I would never want to put myself in that position. So yeah, but I do think, in all honesty though, I think publishing, and I think someone noted this in the chat, like it changes so much that it's really hard to get that kind of stuff captured in a book that takes years to publish. It would almost be better if someone had like, blog or like something that can be updated more frequently.
Like a YouTube channel.
Yes, exactly. Alexa. Yeah.
If you don't know who Alexa is, she is pretty obscure. You probably never heard of her.
Ugh, I gotta start posting again. I skipped a week for the first time in 3.5 years.
Wow. I skip them every once in a while. I'm just like,
Just there was a coup.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was just this coup going on.
I just didn't want to. I didn't want to edit. I had footage.
Yeah.
Didn't want to edit it. I did a puzzle instead. No regrets. So.
What was the puzzle of?
I did a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle that was like a cottage scene, and now I am working on a Parisian setting.
Ooh,
yeah,
I'm here for the Parisian.
Next is going to be a puzzle of the coup.
Yeah.
It's actually an Art Deco woman, but yeah, because that's what I ordered. Because I keep ordering puzzles because I'm a grandmother now. It's fine.
So many people I know do puzzles like ever since quarantine started. Like so many people.
What I discovered about them, I've been doing paint by number as well. It's like you have to have, there's like an order to it. There's order and focus, but not the kind of order and focus that actually requires real mental or emotional energy.
I know a lot of people have gotten into diamond painting too, because that's similar to like paint by number.
Anything like I'm finding like I like those. It's like focus, but not too much focus, because I can't play video games anymore. I've tried. And like games I love, and I find that I peter out on them after 20 minutes. And they're games I used to, I mean, it's good for my writing that I'm not getting sucked into a video game for 8 hours. But yeah. And that's the other thing. I can do a puzzle for a couple hours and then pull myself away from it so I can still get other stuff done. So yeah. Like
I've never completed a puzzle in my life. I feel like I don't have the attention span, but I don't know, the way you're describing it sounds like maybe I should try. Like maybe it would be
frustration sometimes. Because sometimes you're like, why doesn't this piece fit? It has to be the right order. And then like I'll just move to a different area of the puzzle when I'm frustrated by one area.
And you can listen to an audiobook while you do it.
Inevitably I'll find the right piece and I'm like, son of a bitch, I can't believe this is the right piece for this part of the puzzle. I never would have guessed.
But I also know that Laura likes to listen to audiobooks while she does stuff, so you could definitely listen to audiobooks while you
honestly,
do it.
I've been putting on like TV that I don't have to pay complete attention to while I do it.
Yeah.
I just watched the first season of Nancy Drew, which was a trip. It was weird.
I've discovered that for me, like, I have been working better on like plotting my book if I have something on the TV in the background that I don't have to pay attention to, because it's distracting enough that it helps me concentrate. And so I've been putting on Law & Order SVU because I've seen every episode 5 million times. I don't have to pay attention to it. So I've been like working, and then that way, if I want to take like a 2-minute break, I can just look up at the TV and then go right back to it. And I don't get like sucked into my phone or other things that are distracting, because it's not going to hold my attention enough that I'm not going to get back to the book. So that has been helpful. I have 2 things. I basically watch Law & Order SVU, or I watch the old Unsolved Mysteries because I've seen all of those 500 times too.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, maybe I should look into the puzzle thing.
It's interesting. I can go hard on you. I've only been in it for a couple weeks, but I already have opinions about brands. So and the way that they cut.
Where's that video, Alexa? We want that video.
There's different ways to cut puzzles. So
I feel like it'd be nice just to have something to focus on doing that just has like an order to it, like a way of doing things.
Exactly. That's the thing. As long as there aren't any missing pieces, there is a place for every single piece. And like that, there's like a singular focus to that, including when I'm frustrated of like, so you can't, I actually have a section of the puzzle where I just cannot find like the last 4 pieces in these. And I'm like, because half this puzzle's blue. And I'm like, grrr. But I'm like, it's okay. You will find those pieces eventually. They have to exist unless they don't. And if they're missing, I will be mad. But that is rage for another moment, for another time, if that is the case. But hopefully there's a place for every piece. There's something philosophical about that. And maybe it'll help me draft my book, which is what I need to do.
Yeah, I think maybe like focusing on that. Sometimes when I'm focusing my energy like that and I'm not thinking about my book, that's when stuff pops in my head about my book. So I think that can be helpful too, to like where you're concentrating your brain, but not on that thing. And it allows it to sort of like freely think about stuff.
It's a similar concept as taking a shower, just with jigsaw puzzles.
Definitely. Miranda wants to know if your cat steals any of your puzzle pieces.
So they knocked the entire puzzle over the other day. That I had to redo my edges. That was annoying. Luckily, it's a Ravensburger, so they mostly stick together. So yes, and actually this morning I woke up to find I have the pieces in these little like containers, and the cat had clearly stepped on it because I found it in the trash. So I had to fish puzzle pieces out of a waste basket.
Oh my
Luckily,
God.
I'd only thrown away dry, undisgusting things. I have to find better puzzle storage in my small apartment because they've been sleeping on my puzzle board because it's next to the sunlight. So I have a problem.
Yeah.
The answer is yes, and I have a problem because they love to like put their paws into my little puzzle sorters and like with the pieces, and then they'll try to sleep inside the box. So
what you're saying is there is a possibility that some of those pieces may never be found.
Well, I'll tell you, on the first, this is a puzzle live now. On the first puzzle I completed, it's going to be in my vlog. I've been vlogging. I completed the puzzle, except I was missing an edge piece. And yesterday I sat down to film, and I found that goddamn edge piece in a different part of the room. It was just sitting on another rug. And I was filming a video, and I went, goddamn edge piece. But at least I found it because I looked for it for 3 days. And it 100%, the place I found it, that was a cat. 100%. It got where it got because of a cat. But sometimes it's me. I've dropped pieces and like had to go crawling under the couch. So which I'm like old and decrepit. It really hurts my knees. So
all right. Well, I feel like, was there anything else that you guys can think of in terms of the book? I feel like we covered.
It's good. My main recommendation, I haven't read Story Genius. I know you both really love it. So based on my limited knowledge of the ones I've read, like I would recommend this in concert with Save the Cat Writes a Novel as like must reads, because that's the one. This isn't like, it has good structure information and plot, etc. And it talks about Freytag's pyramid, but this isn't one that goes hard on structure in the same way that you might expect.
Yes.
Anything that has beats or acts. Exactly. So like I would couple this with Save the Cat.
I would agree. And I actually think the way I kind of think about this is like, a good friend of yours is an editor, and she's giving you advice on.
Advice. It's not.
It's not.
And in fairness, I wouldn't want an editor who is like, "We have to make your story fit into this step-by-step act beat thing."
Exactly.
Wrong. I would be
generally, definitely, and really for the opinion of like, hey, look, I'm someone who buys books, and these are what I notice of the kinds of books that I buy and that we publish, and when I'm cleaning these books up, this is what we try to do. And it's just her advice from that perspective. And I 100% think that it is for people who are going to write, not just like Alexa, you had said, and maybe not even just people, but definitely if you're writing for children and young adult, highly recommend. And I would say the thing I love the most about Story Genius for me is really that one is so helpful to me to figure out my character. Like she does a lot of like pre-planning before your book so that you understand your character better. And that's what I think is the most helpful out of Story Genius is she gives a lot of advice on how to understand your character so that you can pick the right stuff. But I feel like this is different. This is helpful in a totally different way. And I definitely think this goes really well with Save the Cat Writes a Novel for sure.
And also just a good window, because you said it, a good window into what is it like to actually work with an editor.
Yes.
Which you don't always get from craft books. And it's hard to describe. They will say what it's like to work with your mom, the editor. Like she's a wonderful mom type. She must be so nice to work with.
I know.
That makes me sound like I've had bad experiences. I haven't. I have had a mom editor before. It was nice. But then I've also like, they don't all come in that flavor. Like they're more like your stern friend, your auntie. Like they're different. They're different vibes.
I will say as a writer, that's what I think I need those. I need that stern friend rather than a mom. Because mom.
I also I respond well to it, but like I need a little push.
See, I think I would do better with the mom. Like, sweetie, like this is great, but like if you want it to be better, like we probably need this. I'm like, okay. I think that's what I need. I don't. Yeah, because I have a tendency to, like be defensive or you know what I mean. So if someone's saying something, but I think if someone's saying it very soft and like sort of nurturingly, I think it would be better for me.
I will say there are editors who are the complete opposite of that, and I have definitely watched them work with authors who needed mom editors, and it hurts.
Yeah,
not me. But meaning like
choose who we work with.
It can make a huge difference, like making sure that those styles mesh.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
it's definitely something to consider when you're getting an agent too. What
and tell your agent that, because a good agent actually understands the personality and working style of the editors they're submitting to. I hope so. Honestly, I can tell when they don't, because that's when some of those mismatches are made. And I know it's like, hey, you're like, oh no, fear mongering. It's really critical who you sign with as your agent.
My agent's always like, if I'm like, oh, I don't know this editor very well, she's like, oh, I think you would work so great with this person.
And
like,
that's
this person.
That's the sign. Your agent takes care with that. Some agents don't. Mine does 100%. She like, I like, not like I test my agent. That sounds so pedantic, but like in the past I've asked, oh, what about, because if it's been an imprint where I'm familiar with editors, why this editor instead of that editor? And I just love hearing her explain. I'm like your agent should have very specific, thoughtful reasons why they're subbing you. And it's not just, I know they like books like that. Often it is, I think you would work well together.
Yeah. I think it's hard sometimes though, because so many of us want agents and sometimes you don't have a choice in your agent, you know? Well, and so sometimes it's like,
in the sense that you shouldn't.
Right. But that's a hard choice to say, okay, no agent or...
No agent is better than a bad agent. Yeah, I'm here.
I think sometimes it's hard for people to make that decision.
And if you were in my circles, I will slap you on the wrist. If you query someone who you shouldn't query, I will hurt you.
Yeah, I definitely think that's hard for people, though. I can understand. I want something so bad, you know.
And I've just learned from experience. I definitely queried some people I shouldn't have queried in the past. We all do it. So. Yeah. But I mean, it didn't like turn into anything.
Right. But
I ended up fine. But
yeah.
I feel you. So yeah.
All right. Well, this was a good discussion of this book. I actually really, it was a good time for me to read this too. It was a good, nice introduction to the year. We got a good start. Yeah. And it's a good start to the year, you know, of a good craft book. So
yeah, it definitely made me go, well, got to start writing.
Yeah, exactly. It did. For sure. But I've actually been surprisingly doing great so far in 2021.
Yeah, I'm watching your vlogs.
So fingers crossed it goes much better this year than last year. So but yeah, so thank you guys, everyone, for coming. And those of you who are watching this later in the replay, I will do an actual review of this in a couple weeks on my channel for those who didn't want to sit through the 2-hour, or if you just want a, condensed version of what I thought of it. And then also the new book will be announced on my channel on Tuesday. So if you're not already subscribed to me, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And then also, if you're not already, which you probably already are, subscribe to Alexa or Kevin, which is this way because it's opposite. Then make sure they are linked in the description. And everyone send loving, healing vibes to Lindsay, who unfortunately could not make it today, but we are thinking of her and we love her and we hope she gets better soon. And I'm pretty sure she liked the book as well. So from what I heard from her. So
I'm so bummed. I mean, obviously because I don't want her to be sick, but also like I wanted to hear what a middle grade writer thought.
Exactly. Yeah. So
because I thought the middle grade stuff was especially strong, mostly because Cheryl Klein has worked on some good middle grade titles.
Yeah.
A lot of those examples were her books that she'd worked on.
We should encourage her too, since she couldn't make it, do a review of it on her channel so we can see what she thinks from a middle grade perspective. So if you're not already subscribed to Lindsay,
with me that it's a good resource for essentially like lower YA and all middle grade. Because I at least, maybe it's because I don't write middle grade though, that I found those sections really compelling.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to hear what she thinks having written middle grade.
Having written middle grade. So. All right.
All right, guys. Well, thanks. And yeah, we'll see you later, I guess. I don't know how to end this. So subscribe. Bye. Awkward.